Hi, this is Bennett Tchaikovsky, and welcome to Becoming a Licensed Certified Public Accountant in California. The video is for informational purposes only and represents the opinion of the author only. No representations are made whatsoever on behalf of Irvine Valley College and or the South Orange County Community College District. The California State Board of Accountancy makes all final determinations when it comes to licensing. Therefore, the information contained in this video is to assist you only in determining what you need to become a CPA. So to become a licensed CPA in California, the resource where I pretty much pulled everything from on this presentation from is right here, which is the CPA Licensing Handbook that's put forth by the California Board of Accountancy. And it's a great book. It's 25 pages, very, very thorough. But I'm just going to kind of highlight some of my own thoughts in terms of what you need to do to become licensed. So pass the CPA exam. Given you're going to have to pass all 4 parts. It is a very hard exam, but it is very doable. There are great review courses out there, including Rogers CPA Review, Becker CPA Review, Wiley, Gleim, Surgeon. I know students who have passed with all of those various different courses or combinations with one another. It just depends on which one you like the best. That's really what the answer is. So you're going to pass that CPA exam. And as far as the education goes, I've done a separate video on that. So I'm going to give you that to look at there. I'm not going to spend, this video is not to go through the education requirements. That's a video unto itself. Then what you're going to need to do is to document your year of work experience that you received under an actively licensed CPA. You'll then need to pass the professional ethics exams for CPAs or the PEF. And then you're going to need to meet the other requirements, including fingerprinting, having a valid social security number, completing a criminal conviction disclosure form, and then there's some other license and application fees. Now, I received an email from a student who was saying to me, hey, you know, what's the difference between just passing the CPA exam versus, you know, becoming licensed? Like, what's the big difference, and why is being a CPA so important? I'm going to share with you some just general thoughts on this. And if I've said these things before, I apologize, but it's important to remember them again and to remind you about these again. The first thing is in terms of promotion. When you're working at a public accounting firm, a lot of firms will not let you become a manager unless you have passed and have become a licensed CPA. And also, too, when people are looking at you for other full-time work, they want to see the licensed CPA. When you are a licensed CPA, you have a higher calling or a higher duty, meaning that if you screw up or if you do something that's bad, not only are you going to be losing your job, right, at that particular firm, but at the same time, you're also going to be losing your CPA license. You don't want to lose your CPA license once you've done it. It's a major pain. And I can tell you that the reason why our profession is held in such high regard, and this is for accountants, not for attorneys, the reason why the accounting profession is held in such high regard is mainly because of our ethical conduct. If we do something wrong, there will be consequences for it. And I think a lot of times, and I also teach accounting ethics, one of the things I've really noticed in terms of a pattern is that if I'm running a not-for-profit, I would much rather hire a CPA to be my accountant because they're really going to be thinking twice before they do anything wrong. That Key Worldwide Foundation that was founded by Rick Singer, and it had, I think it was Stephen Massera, who was their CFO. I looked online. I couldn't find anything about this Stephen Massera guy. I'm pretty sure he's not a CPA. But if I was doing business with the Key Worldwide Foundation and had it been a legitimate organization, I probably would be asking is the accountant who's there, are they a CPA? if they're a CPA and if I'm making a donation, I generally know that there's going to be some sort of accountability because that CPA is simply not going to run off with my money. The other thing is too, and this is kind of along the same lines. If I'm an employer and I'm hiring a person with 10 years of experience, great experience, or if I hire a CPA, if I'm hiring somebody with 2 to 3 years experience and they're a CPA, which one do I hire? Well, guess what? If the accountant screws up, I would have much rather hired the CPA, even though they have less experience. And the main reason is, well, if anybody tries to say, hey, Tchaikovsky, you screwed up, it's like, dude, I hired a CPA. What do you expect me to do? And they kind of go, oh, okay. If I'm hiring a non-accountant in an accounting position and something goes wrong, that's going to be on me. And so I would rather much have it be on that person. Another thing to think about too, and I've seen this a lot, is that you can have a person who gets great experience and they move up the food chain and they end up making $150,000 per year as a CFO, but they're not a CPA. What ends up happening is the recruiters don't recognize the experience. And if they leave that job, they're going to be lucky to get $65,000. And that's really where a huge problem comes in, is because this accountant who's working at this firm making $150,000, they can't really leave the company. Why is that? Is because if they left, they'd be lucky to make $50 or $65, maybe $75,000 per year. And that can actually, in of itself, lead to a lot of ethical problems, because if the person is really tied to that employer and they can't get a job anywhere else because they're not a CPA, that's a huge problem. A couple other things too is that do you have to be an active CPA? The answer is no. You can also be inactive. What does inactive mean? You pay the fee every 2 years. However, you don't need to keep up with the experience. And then lastly, there's also general accounting experience versus auditing or attest experience, which we'll talk about in just a second. And so there are 2 types of licenses when you become a CPA. There's also a blank license, but that's used for accounting firms. And this is really, it's a general accounting experience versus attestation. And so what a general accounting experience license is that you do not need to work for an accounting firm, okay? Or excuse me, you do not need to work, you have to work under a licensed CPA, but you do not need to be doing auditing work. You can do general accounting work. So again, what's really important here is that if you're doing tax work, if you're doing advisory, if you're doing, if you're doing just general accounting, this is really, this is a general accounting, and your experience on your license would just read G for general accountant. For an A experience, or to have an A on your license designation, you need to have done a year of auditing experience. Okay, this is not Scientology. This is attestation, where you're going through and you're planning basically the audit. And so there are very specific requirements as to obtaining your attestation license. I have an A under my license designation. You can find me on the California State Board of Accountancy website. And you'll see that I have that A, meaning that I can sign off on audits. How many audits have I signed off on in my career? The answer is 0. However, again, it's something that if you have an A or a G license, it doesn't really, unless you're going to be working as an auditor and signing off on audit engagements, it's not that big of a deal. I think you could say that there's going to be a little bit more value in the initial part of your career as to attestation. However, what's more important is that you are becoming a licensed CPA. So when we're looking here in terms of how that experience is actually documented, and again, this can be found in the CPA License Handbook. And I just pulled up this here, is that this is the Certificate of Attest Experience for private industry or government. And as you can see here from the various different questions, what happens here is that you're going to have the employer go through here in terms of, hey, what is this? How does this kind of good person do? And this is for the attest side, not the general experience. So do they actually go through and do they plan the audit? Do they prepare preparation of full disclosure financial statements and the like? And so that's really going to be over here in terms of the audit side. Then when we get over here to, so again, once you've done your year, you can have your supervisor go through and essentially their part-time dates are the full-time dates. And notice here in terms of this part-time hours, we'll talk about that in just a moment. So, but again, this is really to go through and to document the work experience. And we're going to look over here, and this is basically the form of general experience. As you can see, it's a lot less in terms of actually filling out different items because the other one is you're actually signing off on. It's very, very specific as for auditing. So you're going to go ahead and document your experience. The next thing you're going to do is that when you're getting your experience documented, and the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because I have had several students who came up to me and they said, and the first one happened back in 2016 when a student was taking my ethics class and said, you know, hey, Tchaikovsky, this, my employer won't sign off on the agreement. And I just said, and I didn't really even know the correct answer, even though I was saying the correct answer, say, hey, tell your supervisor they're violating the law and then you're going to report them to the Board of Accountancy. And that supervisor signed the form within about 2 minutes. So if you, and this is what's very important to know, do not let your employer hold you hostage. If they do, they're running into a very dangerous game. So here's what you're going to do if you're trying to get your experience signed off on by an employer who is not being, you know, honest and is not doing the right thing. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to submit a written request to your supervisor that they complete the certificate of experience on your behalf and submit a copy to the CPA. And when you're doing this, you want to send it via certified mail or another registered mail service. The reason why is that if they're refusing to do it, and if the Board of Accountancy ever decides to open up an investigation, that's going to be one of the first things they're going to be looking for. Did you actually send it via certified mail, return receipt? Because what you're starting to do now is you're building the case. The next thing you want to do is that if the supervisor does not respond, follow up another request in writing. Very, very important. Lastly, then what you're going to do is you're going to get the CBA involved, and that's when this is where it gets even more kind of fun. I would really, if you're going to go through and do this, and if you ever have a problem with it, if you send me an email, I can give you some language to use to help you. You just kind of want to say things like, hey, this is my experience, and I would give them a couple different citations as far basically, and you can find these in, you know, I got all these over here from the Board of Accountancy. So you can find this all here in the Board of Accountancy handbook. That's where I'm getting this language from. So, and if they refuse to do it, then they go up in front of enforcement. And that's not fun because guess what? Who's going to pay for the enforcement costs? The licensed CPA. Who pays for the investigative costs? The licensed CPA. When the CBA Enforcement Division starts their inquiry, they generally aren't going to take something where they're going to lose. And then your CPA who refused to sign it is going to end up in the CPA monthly, or they'll have like a little write-up on why they lost their license. So again, it's really important if they want to play the game of holding you hostage or doing something like that. And when you go on to Glassdoor or some of those other websites, you'll actually see some pretty interesting things about different employers, about how they try to manipulate you and not sign it. So it's always good, you know, to know what your rights are. Also, too, you can have part-time experience. If you've been working part-time, it's very important to document your experience and just basically document those hours. And they basically consider 170 hours of part-time work to be the equivalent of 1 month of full-time employment. Now, I realize that this is like a little bit less than, this seems to be like, okay, wait a second, 40 hours per week times, 4 weeks in a month. Now, it's just basically, if you've worked 770 hours over 3 months, then that's going to be considered to be 1 month of part-time. And who actually signs these forms? The forms are generally going to be signed by an actively licensed CPA. That CPA can also be out of state. However, it has to be from a licensed CPA. Also can be as well as if the person who's signing it doesn't own the business, then the owner's representative. And this is more just kind of for fun. So I have a few colleagues who are teaching accounting. I'm always encouraging them to become CPAs. And guess what? If you've been teaching accounting, you can get the experience requirement based on the number of units that you've taught. So in that case, the dean of the school, not a CPA, would be signing off on the experience. Fun stuff. Okay, so that's who is going through and signing the forms. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to take the PEth, or the Professional Ethics for CPA. Now, a few things here. This is administered by the California Society of CPAs. If you are a student, membership is free. So basically, it's a free candidate membership if you're basically, taking the CPA exam. But if you're a student, it's also free as well. And I think for myself as a professor, it's also free. The California Society of CPAs has an amazing amount of resources, which I have not even fully explored. Maybe try to do that on a future video. But they'll go through into basically to buy the format, basically to buy the test. I want to say it's around $175 to buy the exam. And for the exam, you're going to be able, it's essentially 50 multiple choice questions. There's no time limit, 6 attempts to pass the exam with a grade of 90% or better. You have to complete it a day from the year of purchase. And the results are good for 2 years. I don't know if they're using a proctoring software or what they actually do to make sure it's you who's actually taking the test. However, I think it's open book. I'd have to go through and read it. But again, they're giving you a free, if you're a member, you're getting a free test booklet, which I actually just ordered myself for the free preparation course. So I get that free booklet. And then at the same time over here too, those results are going to be good for 2 years once you take the PEth. Okay, so the other requirements in terms of becoming a CPA is that you need to have a valid social security number or individual taxpayer identification number. You need to be fingerprinted, okay? And this is within California. You're going to use something called live scan. What does that mean? Well, you're going to go to your area police station and you're going to do the live scanning in terms of your fingerprints, and those will be sent through various different agencies. And when you are doing your live scanning, I just had to do it for the California State Bar. You want to get the form specifically for the fingerprinting to make sure you bring it down to the fingerprinting office, and so they'll process it correctly. The other thing here is that you'll also need is, this is a criminal conviction disclosure form. And as far as going through and doing this, better list out everything. Use the kitchen sink, everything essentially except for minor traffic violations. All this needs to be listed on here. If it ever comes up later on that you did something and you did not list it out, very, very important. They can essentially take away your license. And I can tell you from my experience with the Board of Accountancy, I've never had any bad experiences with them. They don't mess around. And if you've had something in the past that happens, it's better to over-disclose than under-disclose. If you need 10 pages for this form, apply to law school. Okay. So that brings us over here. The last thing you're going to be needing are CPA licensing and application fees, which are presently about $250. So thank you. If you have any questions about meeting the education requirements or anything else in this video, please feel free to contact me via email at 1812cpa@gmail.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I really appreciate that. And again, I want to thank you for joining me on this video here today. Thanks so much.